Welcome everyone, this is your math tutor Naresh. In this tutorial we're going to learn how to common factor in pairs, and another name for this is common factoring by grouping. So let's look at first example. So we're given xy plus 2x plus 3y plus 6. So we're asked to factor this question. Now the first thing we always do is look for a common factor. So the first thing you want to do is look at all four terms and see if there is anything common. So if I look at the number, so we got number 1, we got 2, we got 3, and we got 6, and there is nothing common between those four numbers that I can pull out as a common factor. So now let's look at the variables. Is x common? X only appears in the first two terms, so it's not common in all four terms. And similarly y, y appears in the first and the third term, so it's not common either. So if I take all four terms collectively and I'm trying to find a common factor, there isn't any, right? So I can't pull out any variable, I can't pull out any number as a common factor. So what I'm going to do in this case is, and I'm going to see if I can pair them, and then maybe I can common factor the pairs separately, and then maybe that will allow me to move further in completing my factoring of this question. So maybe I can group the first two terms and the last two terms. So I'll have two pairs. So it's a trial and error. So in this case I choose the first two and the last two because the first two have an x in common. I could try xy pairing with 3y because then both of those terms have one thing common, which would be y. So it's trial and error. So let's just pair the first two and the last two and see how far we get. So now what I'm going to do is rewrite xy plus 2x in brackets, so, and then plus the last two terms 3y plus 6. So I've got two pairs. So now what I'm going to do is common factor each bracket separately. So in this bracket here, x is common, so let's pull out a factor of x, and then what are we left with? So from xy I pull out a factor of x, I'm left with a factor of y. So x times what will give me xy? X times y, right? So from 2x, I've pulled out a factor of x. What's the other factor? So that factor is 2. So x times what will give me 2x? X times 2. Alright, so we're done with the first bracket, and now let's do the same thing with the second bracket. So what's common between 3y and 6? Let's look at the numbers, 3 and 6. So 3 is common because 3 goes into both itself and it also goes into 6. So pull out a factor of 3, and what am I left with? So from 3y, you pull out a factor of 3. What's the other factor? Is y. So from 6, you pull out a factor of 3. So what's the other factor? It's 2, right? So 3 times y is 3y. 3 times 2 is 6. So now I've factored both of these brackets separately. So now what I see is that I have y plus 2 and y plus 2 appearing as a common. And this is actually a hint to me that I'm on the right track. So whatever I paired at the first step, that is correct. So this is what I'm hoping for, that when I group the first two, the last two, or group the first and the third and second and the fourth, however I group, when I common factor each bracket, I'm looking for, or I'm hoping that I will end up with identical bracket in both terms. So in this case my bracket y plus 2 is common. So now I can pull y plus 2 as a common factor and factor further. Okay, so just to repeat myself, so now in this step I have two terms. This whole thing is one term, and this whole thing is another term connected by addition operation. So from these two terms we have a common factor of this bracket. because this bracket, y plus 2, appears in both of these terms. So let's pull out the whole bracket as a common. And now what are we left with? So from this bracket, we pull out a factor of y plus 2. The other factor, the remaining factor, is x. So x goes here, right? And now similarly from here, we pulled out a factor of y plus 2. The other remaining factor is 3. So this is the final answer. So we were given 4 terms in the question, and the question was to factor, common factor, and this is the answer. So we've done it by grouping or by pairing terms. So now you can check your answer to see if you are correct. So I'm just going to put double lines here just to indicate that we're done with the question. This is the final answer. Now, to check your answer, all you have to do is multiply this out, right? So let's multiply it out. So y plus 2 times x plus 3. So what's y times x? So that's yx. What's y times 3? That's 3y. And what's 2 times x? That's 2x. And what's 2 times 3? That's 6. And now compare this with the original question. Is that what we were given? So we have yx, and here we have xy, so they are the same term. So whether you write xy or yx, they both mean the same thing. 3y, so we got a 3y term there, so that's correct. 2x, we have that term right there, so there you go. And lastly, we have 6. So when I multiply these two factors, I get with this expression, which is identical to what we were given in the question. So you see here I've got my 3y as second term and 2x as the third, right? So this is what I meant. So you have to try. So if the question was given to me in this form, right, then I would choose to pair yx with 2x. Then I would be pairing the first and the third term and the second and the last term, right? So, but it doesn't matter which, sometimes it doesn't matter which pair you choose. So if I chose, let's say, xy with 3y, maybe I'll still end up with the same answer, right? So you can try that for yourself. Okay, so let's do example number 2. Okay, so example number 2, common factor. So 3ac plus 3c minus 2ba minus 2b. So this is the question we're given. The question is to factor. So first, we don't know whether it's going to be by grouping in pairs or not, or if it's just a simple common factor type of question. So the first thing you always want to do is look at all 4 terms collectively and see if there is anything common. So we have 3, 3, 2, and 2 as numbers, as the coefficients. So there isn't one that we can pull out for when we take all 4 terms collectively. So, and similarly, the letter A, the variable A, appears only in 2 terms. Similarly, C appears in 2 terms. So A, B, C, none of them are common if we take all 4 terms collectively. So the next step is, okay, can we pair them? Can we group them? And then the question after that is, which 2 terms do you want to pair? So I think in this case, I'm just going to pair the first 2 and the last 2. Simply because I see a lot of commons. I see 3's in these 2, and I see a C, and here I see 2's, and I see a variable B. So I think it's safe we can pair the first 2 and the last 2. So let's put them in brackets. So 3ac plus 3c. Okay, now I've got a minus here. So I always prefer to have a plus in here. So plus, and now I'm going to copy negative 2ba, negative 2b. So be extra careful when you have a minus here. So it can get tricky with the minus. So the way to avoid any errors is to have a plus in between. Okay. So now, what's the common factor between these 2 terms? So we know that 3 is common, and A is not common, C is common, and we always take out the lowest exponent. And in this case, the exponent happens to be 1 on both variables. Okay, so from 3ac we pulled out a factor of 3c, so what's the other factor? So 3c times what factor will give me 3ac? That's another way of looking at it, and that factor is a, right? So you can multiply it out, so 3c times a is 3ac. So the second term, from 3c we pulled out the factor of 3c, we're left with a factor of 1, right? So now let's move on to the second bracket. So here we know 2 is common, and we know b is common, so is the negative sign. So this is where I'm going to pull out not a 2, but a negative 2. So I'm pulling out negative 2, and at the same time I can pull out a factor of b. So this is the key step right here, so that's what you want to do. In the step before, you want to have a plus, right? And then when you factor, you pull out the negative 2 in this case. So this way you are making sure that you will not make a mechanical error or a careless error. Okay? So negative 2b times what will give me negative 2ba? That missing factor is a. So from negative 2b, I pulled the entire thing out, negative 2b. So the remaining factor is plus 1. Notice this is plus 1 because negative times positive, we want it to be negative, right? So if you had a negative here, negative times negative would give positive, right? So, and now the next step is I'm looking for, I'm hoping that I would have the same bracket in both terms, right? And I do. So a plus 1 is a common bracket. So I can pull that out now. So I'm factoring further, right? So at this step, I factored these two brackets. I factored the pair separately, but now I factor further because in this expression I have bracket which is common. So you always want to factor fully. So a plus 1, the bracket is common, so what are we left with? So from here we know the other factor is 3c, and from here we're left with minus 2b. So this is the final answer. And you actually can ask yourself, can I factor this further? And the answer is no, because what would you factor from a plus 1? What would you factor from 3c minus 2b? There isn't anything common, right, in this bracket or that bracket separately, and so you reach the end. So that's the final answer. Okay. All right, so let's do one more example. So example number 3. So we are given 8x squared y plus 4 minus 6y minus 12x squared. So that is what we're given. So 8x squared y, actually this is a plus 9. Okay, so 8x squared plus 9 minus 6y minus 12x squared. Okay, so alright, so that's the question. Okay, so the first thing we do is we're common factoring. So you look for, you take all 4 terms collectively and see if you can find a common factor between 8, 9, 6, and 12. 9, 6, and 12, yeah, they're all multiples of 3, but 8 is not. So there isn't a number that is common to all of these 4. Now, x doesn't appear in all terms, nor does y, so nothing is common if I take all 4 terms collectively, right? So now the next question is, can I pair them? Can I group them? Okay, so in this case, it's not so clear or obvious which 2 terms to group. So let's see, if I do 8x squared y, there actually is nothing common, right? So from 8 and 9, nothing is common. The variables are in this term, no variables in here. So maybe then I should pair this one with this one, right? At least with that, I have y, and then 8 and 6, I can pull something out. And then from 9 and the negative 12x squared, there is no variable, but there is a number that I can pull out, like a 3. 3 goes into both, right? So, or another possibility is I can pair 8x squared y with 12x squared, because even there I can pull out x squared, and I can, there is a common factor between 8 and 12. And then I'm left with these two terms in between, and hopefully when I factor 3 from here, then what I'm left with, maybe that is the common factor. So it's trial and error, so you can decide which two terms you want to pick, right? So let's see, what do I want to do? So I would say, okay, maybe why don't we pair these two together, since we've got the x squared and we have 8 and 12. And if that doesn't work, then we can always come back and pair this with this and try and see how far we get. Okay, so make a decision. So 8x squared y minus 12x squared. So I'm going to group these two, always have a plus in between here, and then I have 9 minus 6y. So trial and error, this is what I chose to do. If this doesn't work, then I will come back and I will pair 8x squared with 8x squared y with negative 6y, and then try that. Okay, so now from here, 4 is a common factor between 8 and 12, and now x squared appears in both, so x squared is common and y is not common, right? So from this we pulled out a factor of 4x squared, so what's the remaining factor? In other words, 4x squared times what will give me 8x squared y. So 4 times 2 gives me 8. X squared is already there, and I'm missing a factor of y. Okay. Now from here, so minus, so 4 times negative 3 will give me 12, and then x squared is already there, so the missing factor there is minus 3. So we're done with this bracket. Now let's move on to this. So the common factor between 9 and 6 is 3. Okay, so it's 3. And now over here, so 3 times what gives me 9 is 3. Now 3 times what will give me negative 6y? It's negative 2y. Okay, so I can double check. 3 times 3 is 9. 3 times negative 2y is negative 6y. So what I'm hoping for now is that these two brackets would turn out to be the same. So question mark, are they the same? They look the same, but are they the same? 2y minus 3, this is 3 minus 2y, right? So they are not the same. They're different by a factor of negative 1. If I multiply this by negative 1, I'll get negative 2y, positive 3. And that's what this is, right? So negative 2y and a positive 3. Or if I multiply this by negative 1 or factor out negative 1, then this will become negative 3 and positive 2y. So we need to make them the same. So what I'm going to do is, from here, I'm going to pull out a factor of negative 1. So I will copy the first term as is, 4x squared 2y minus 3. So now from here, I'm going to pull out a factor of negative 1. So this will become negative 3. Notice when you pull out a factor of negative 1, or when you multiply by negative 1, the signs will change, right? So the 3 that's inside will now become negative 3. The negative 2y will now become positive 2y. So now the question is, compare these, are they the same, right? So the answer is yes. So 2y minus 3 is the same as negative 3 plus 2y. So actually I'm going to add in one more step so you can see what I mean. So copy the first term as is, then the second term minus 3, I'm going to rewrite it. I'm going to write the y term first. So 2y, I don't need to put the plus sign in front, and then minus 3. So now you can clearly see that 2y minus 3 is identical in both terms. So now from here, the common factor is the bracket, which is 2y minus 3. And then, so I pull that out, and the remaining factor here is 4x squared, and for the second term it's minus 3. So this is the final answer. So I'm done here. So this required a bit of work, and so that's how you do common factoring in pairs. I'm going to stop here, and I hope you found the tutorial useful. If you did, please like or subscribe, and I will do another video where we will do more practice questions. Once again, thank you for watching.